There's a photograph from the 1970s of a woman with striking features, smooth skin, natural beauty, warm eyes, standing on the plains of Kenya with the confidence of someone who belonged anywhere she wanted to be. By the 1990s, that same woman would become one of the most recognizable faces in the world, but for reasons no one could have predicted. The transformation happened gradually, then all at once, until the woman in the mirror barely resembled the person she used to be. This is the story of Jocelyn Wildenstein, the Swiss beauty who married into one of the world's wealthiest families and became a cautionary tale about love, obsession, and the price of trying to hold on to someone who was already gone. A Swiss girl with big dreams. Jocelyn Alice Paris was born on September 7, 1940 in Lausanne, Switzerland, to parents who lived a quiet middle-class life. Her father, Armand, worked as a buyer for a sporting goods store, while her mother, Liliane, was a housewife. Nothing about Jocelyn's early years suggested music. She would one day become a billionaire socialite or a tabloid fixture. She grew up surrounded by the picturesque Swiss landscapes, developing an appreciation for beauty that seemed perfectly natural at the time. By 17, Jocelyn was dating Cyril Pig, a Swiss producer who had worked on the 1964 film Untold Tranquille. The relationship introduced her to a world beyond the modest confines of Lausanne, a world of creativity, glamour, and possibility. When that relationship ended, Jocelyn didn't retreat back into small-town life. Instead, she moved to Paris, where she began dating Sergio Gabi, an Italian-French filmmaker. Paris, in the 1960s and 70s, was the center of European sophistication, and Jocelyn thrived there. In Paris, she wasn't just a pretty face passing through artistic circles. Jocelyn learned to fly planes and became a skilled hunter. Two pursuits that were unusual for women of her generation, but that would prove significant later in her life. She moved through Parisian society with ease, attending parties, meeting influential people, and cultivating a taste for the finer things in life. Some whispered that she worked for Madame Claude, the famous Parisian madame, who ran music, an elite operation, though Jocelyn always denied these rumors. What's certain is that by her mid-30s, she had developed the poise and sophistication of someone destined for grander things. But what Jocelyn really wanted was Africa. She had dreamed about the continent since childhood, captivated by stories of wildlife and vast open spaces. She made several trips there throughout the 1970s, and it was on one of these adventures that her life would change forever. The lion hunt that changed everything. In 1977, Jocelyn found herself at a shooting weekend at a ranch in Kenya. The invitation had come through Adnan Khashoggi, the wealthy Saudi arms dealer known for throwing lavish parties and introducing interesting people to each other. The ranch was called Old Joy, and it sprawled across 66 acres of pristine Kenyan wilderness in the Laikipia district. It belonged to the Wildenstein family, one of the most powerful art dynasties in the world. It was there that Jocelyn met Alec Wildenstein, heir to a fortune estimated in the billions. The story of their first encounter has an almost mythic quality. Alec had been asked to kill a lion that had been causing problems on a neighbor's property, and Jocelyn, the skilled hunter from Paris, music tagged along. According to Alec's later accounts, she impressed him immediately with her shooting abilities and fearlessness. The next day, he took her for a motorcycle ride across the ranch, and somewhere among the acacia trees and red earth, they shared their first kiss. The romance moved quickly. After they returned to Paris, where Jocelyn was still living with Sergio Gabi, Alec sent her enough white orchids to fill an entire room. The grand gesture worked. Within weeks, Jocelyn had left her filmmaker boyfriend, and after just 4 dates with Alec, he was certain she would be his wife. On April 30th, 1978, they eloped to Las Vegas. She was 37. He was 37. It should have been the beginning of a fairy tale. But Alex's father, Daniel Wildenstein, didn't attend the ceremony. The patriarch of the Wildenstein Empire, a distinguished scholar of Impressionism who ruled his family and his business with an iron fist, had reservations about his son's choice. Daniel was a difficult man, controlling and overbearing, and he made his disapproval known. There were whispers that he even encouraged Alex's previous girlfriend, Kimberly, to try to win him back. But Alec defied his father and married Jocelyn. Anyway, the newlyweds settled into a life that most people couldn't imagine. They divided their time between properties that included a chateau in France, a beach estate in the Caribbean, a house in Lausanne, and an apartment in Paris. But their primary residence was a 5-story townhouse on East 64th Street in Manhattan, complete with rare artwork, 5 purebred greyhounds, and a rare monkey. And then there was Old Joy, the Kenyan ranch where it had all begun. Jocelyn's favorite place in the world, paradise in Kenya. Jocelyn threw herself into managing Old Joy with the passion of someone who had finally found where she belonged. The ranch wasn't just a vacation home. It was a world unto itself. It had over 200 buildings spread across an area 5 times the size of Manhattan, staffed by more than 300 servants. The operating costs alone ran $150 $1,000 per month. But money was no object for the Wildenstein. Jocelyn oversaw millions of dollars in renovations, transforming the property into something spectacular. She hired staff, managed operations, and turned Alogi into a showcase of luxury in the middle of the African wilderness. The ranch housed exotic animals, including white rhinos imported from South Africa, giraffes, leopards, and lions. Jocelyn even had a bulletproof enclosure built for 2 tigers she had brought in. The ranch featured a runway stretching 25 kilometers, about the same length as the Malindi airstrip, allowing the family to come and go by private plane. There was a unique bedroom chalet built at the top of towering rock formations, complete with its own free-form lagoon swimming pool, offering panoramic views across the plains toward Mount Kenya. The property became Jocelyn's masterpiece, a place where she could exercise her considerable talents for design and management. She worked on the interiors, selected furnishings, and created spaces that blended luxury with the raw beauty of the African landscape. For someone who had grown up in modest circumstances in Switzerland, this was the culmination of every childhood dream. The couple had 2 children during these years. Daughter Diane was born in 1979, followed by son Alec Jr. in 1980. Jocelyn seemed to have everything: wealth, a powerful husband, beautiful children, and a paradise in Africa that she had helped create. Friends described her as elegant and charming, a gracious hostess who could shoot like a professional and fly her own plane. She moved between continents with ease, comfortable in any setting from Manhattan high society to the wilds of Kenya. But beneath the surface, cracks were already forming. The Wildenstein family operated under the thumb of Daniel, who remained suspicious of Jocelyn and her influence over his son. Daniel Wildenstein was known throughout the art world as a man of immense knowledge and equally immense control. He had built an empire on his expertise in Impressionist art, but he ruled his family with the same iron fist he used in business. He didn't believe his sons needed university educations. The family business was education enough. He made all major decisions, controlled the purse strings, and expected absolute obedience. Alec, caught between his domineering father and his new wife, struggled with depression and mood swings. He loved Jocelyn, but he also couldn't escape his father's shadow. Daniel continued to prefer Alec's ex-girlfriend and made his disapproval of Jocelyn known in subtle and not so subtle ways. The pressure ate at Alec, and as the years passed, he began to look for escape in other places, music, other faces. And then there was the spending, a life beyond excess. The Wildenstein's lifestyle wasn't just lavish, it was almost incomprehensible. Jocelyn once spent $10 million in a single visit to Cartier, the famous French jeweler. She bought a Chanel dress for $350. The couple's monthly expenses ran to $1 million with $547 dollars of that going to food and wine alone. Jocelyn's annual telephone bill came to €60. She employed so many servants that she later admitted in court documents that she had no idea how to light a stove, make toast, or boil an egg. Alex spared no expense in making sure his wife outshone everyone at Manhattan's social events. He bought her enormous quantities of jewelry and encouraged her wardrobe choices. But according to Jocelyn, Alec was a difficult man to please. He was moody, subject to fits of melancholy, and his attention began to wander as the years passed. Jocelyn started to worry that he was losing interest in her, and she noticed something else. Alex's fascination with the big cats at Old Yogi, particularly the lynxes and tigers. It was around this time that Jocelyn made a decision that would alter the course of her life. If Alec loved big cats so much, perhaps he would find her more attractive if she looked more feline. It sounds absurd now, but in Jocelyn's mind, it made perfect sense. She would transform herself into something exotic, something that would capture his attention the way the wild animals did. What started as a simple idea would spiral into an obsession that would change not just her appearance, but her entire future. The first surgery. The transformation began innocuously enough. Just a year into their marriage in 1979, Jocelyn told Alec that his eyes looked baggy. She suggested they get matching eye lifts, a heirs and hers procedure. Alec agreed, and they went to the surgeon together. It was meant to be a small thing, a minor enhancement. But for Jocelyn, that first surgery opened a door that she would never be able to close. She went back, and then she went back again. Each time she pushed a little further, changed a little more. She had her eyes reshaped to give them an upward slant. She had collagen injected into her lips, her cheeks, her chin. She underwent multiple facelifts, at least 7 over the years. She had her pigment darkened. With each procedure, she believed she was getting closer to the look she wanted, the look that would make Alex see her the way he once had. The psychological progression was gradual but relentless. Friends who knew Jocelyn before and during her transformation watched with growing alarm as she became more and more obsessed with modification. It wasn't just about looking younger. Though Jocelyn did claim that Alec hated old people and wanted her to stay youthful, it was about becoming something else entirely, something that might finally be enough to keep his attention from wandering. Years later, Jocelyn would describe Alex's reaction to aging in telling terms. She said he never pushed her to have surgery, that he always told her she looked young. But then she would add a qualifier that spoke volumes about the underlying anxiety until the day you don't look young enough. The fear of not being young enough, beautiful enough, interesting enough. These anxieties drove her back to the surgeon's office again and again. But the surgeries had the opposite effect of what she intended. Alec later told reporters that the first time he saw his wife after one of her more drastic procedures, he screamed in horror. He described her approach to plastic surgery as treating her face like a piece of furniture that could be fixed and adjusted. He told her that skin doesn't work that way, that you can't just keep stretching and filling and reshaping without consequences. But she wouldn't listen to Alec. His wife had become unrecognizable, a stranger wearing Jocelyn's clothes and living Jocelyn's life. Other people noticed too. Stories circulated that when Jocelyn walked into her plastic surgeon's waiting room, other patients would flee in fear, music, terrified they might end up looking the same way. The medical staff allegedly had difficulty treating her because her skin had been pulled so tight that normal procedures became complicated. But Jocelyn kept going back, kept asking for more, convinced that the next procedure would be the one that finally worked. Jocelyn's appearance became increasingly extreme. Her skin was stretched so tightly across her face that she could barely blink. Her lips, pumped full of collagen, looked rubber. Her cheekbones jutted out sharply, and her eyes had taken on a distinctly feline quality that was both striking and unsettling. The transformation cost an estimated $2 million to $4 million, but it didn't bring Alec back. In fact, it seemed to push him further away with each new change. Despite the visible results, Jocelyn insisted the changes were minimal. She claimed that her high cheekbones and distinctive eyes were hereditary traits from her Swiss family, pointing to photographs of her grandmother as proof. She admitted only to one surgery, the multi-million-dollar procedure to make her eyes more cat-like, which she said she and Alec had done together. The denial would persist for decades, even as the evidence of extensive surgical intervention became impossible to ignore. She would maintain this story until her death, insisting that Swiss heritage and good lighting were responsible for her appearance, not hundreds of procedures. But the real problem wasn't the surgeries themselves, or even what they had done to her face. The real problem was that Alec had already moved on. The surgeries hadn't saved the marriage. They had become one more source of conflict in a relationship that was already falling apart. And soon, everything would come crashing down in a single violent night that would change both their lives forever. The night everything fell apart. In 1997, Jocelyn's father, Armand Périssé, passed away from pneumonia in Kenya. Alec didn't immediately travel to Africa for the funeral. 3 weeks later, he told Jocelyn that their marriage was over. She was devastated, but she also began to suspect that there was someone else. On a September evening in 1997, Jocelyn returned to their Manhattan townhouse after a trip to Kenya. She arrived with 2 bodyguards, perhaps already suspecting what she might find. What she found was worse than she'd imagined. In her own bedroom, she discovered Alec wearing nothing but a towel, a gun in his hand. Running down the hallway was a naked young blonde woman. Not even the Russian model Yelena Jericho that Jocelyn had heard rumors about, but someone else entirely. The scene devolved into chaos. Alec, perhaps startled or perhaps simply caught, pointed the Smith & Wesson at Jocelyn. He later claimed he thought she was an intruder breaking into the house. The police were called. Alec Wildenstein, billionaire art dealer, spent a night in jail on charges of threatening behavior with a weapon. A judge ordered him to stay away from Jocelyn and barred him from entering the Manhattan home they had shared. Jocelyn filed for divorce immediately, citing adultery. What followed was one of the most contentious, expensive, and publicly messy divorces in history. The Wildenstein family, who had always operated in secrecy and valued their privacy above all else, suddenly found their finances and personal lives split across newspapers around the world. The divorce that made headlines. The divorce proceedings lasted nearly 2 years and turned into a media circus. Details about the couple's extravagant lifestyle became public fodder. People read about the $60,000 phone bills, the $1 million monthly spending, the $10 million shopping sprees. But what really captured public attention was Jocelyn's appearance. The media, never kind to women whose looks don't conform to conventional standards, had a field day. She was dubbed the Bride of Wildenstein by columnist George Rush of the New York Daily News. Other outlets called her Catwoman, the Lion Queen, and even compared her to a space alien. The Sunday Mirror in London ran particularly cruel headlines. The nicknames stuck, and they would follow Jocelyn for the rest of her life. What should have been a private struggle played out in front of millions of people, most of whom seemed more interested in mocking her appearance than understanding what she had been through. The tabloid coverage was relentless, music, and brutal. Photographers waited outside court hearings to capture unflattering angles. Columnists wrote pieces dissecting her every feature, speculating about which procedures she'd had, and comparing before and after photos. Late-night comedians made jokes. The cruelty was so pervasive that it became normalized. Making fun of Jocelyn Wildenstein's appearance was just something people did without considering the human being behind the surgically altered face. During the proceedings, even more details emerged about the marriage and the Wildenstein family dynamics. Alec made claims that Jocelyn had worked as a courtesan in Paris before they met, suggesting she had been employed by Madame Claude, the infamous madam, who ran an elite operation catering to wealthy and powerful men. Jocelyn denied it vehemently, but the accusation made headlines and added another layer of scandal to an already sensational story. The Wildenstein family tried to have her removed from Ollie, changed the combinations to the safes, and told the staff to ignore her. Jocelyn's own mother was living at the ranch at the time, being treated for Alzheimer's disease, and Jocelyn was barred from visiting her. The cruelty of it was almost incomprehensible. The woman who had poured her heart into music, transforming Old Joy into a paradise, who had managed every detail of the operation for years, was now being treated like an intruder on property she had helped create. The Wildenstein family patriarch, Daniel, was particularly furious about the public nature of the divorce. The family had operated in secrecy for generations, music conducting their business behind closed doors, moving art and money around the world in ways that avoided scrutiny and taxes. Now, because of his daughter-in-law, their finances and personal lives were being examined in open court. The judge in the case, Marilyn Diamond, even received death threats in the mail during the proceedings, a sign of just how desperate the family was to keep their secrets hidden. But Jocelyn had one advantage that the Wildenstein hadn't fully appreciated. She knew where the money was. She had been married to Alec for 2 decades. She had managed properties, overseen renovations worth millions, and been privy to conversations about the family business that she probably wasn't supposed to hear. She had seen documents, signed papers, and understood more about the Wildenstein financial empire than they realized, and she wasn't afraid to use that knowledge. The family's worst fear was a forensic accounting in an American courtroom. The secrets that might emerge wouldn't just be embarrassing. They could be criminal. Money hidden in offshore accounts. Art moved between countries to avoid taxes. Trusts set up to shield assets from governments and creditors. The Wildenstein fortune had been built not just on expertise in Impressionist art, but on an elaborate system of financial secrecy that had served the family for generations. Jocelyn threatened all of that, so they settled, and they settled big. But the path to that settlement would first require Jocelyn to prove she needed the kind of support she was requesting. Support that amounted to maintaining the lifestyle she had lived during the marriage. In 1999, when the divorce was finally finalized, Jocelyn walked away with $5 billion in a lump sum payment, with some sources claiming the total was as high as $8 billion. On top of that, she would receive $100 million per year for the next 13 years. It was one of the largest divorce settlements in history, making headlines around the world and setting a new standard for what wealthy divorces could cost. The judge, however, added one unusual stipulation. Jocelyn could not use any of the settlement money for further cosmetic surgery. It was an extraordinary condition, essentially ordering someone not to spend their own money in a particular way. But given the extent of Jocelyn's procedures and the role they had played in the dissolution of the marriage, the judge felt it was necessary. She was also advised to buy a microwave, a somewhat condescending suggestion given that Jocelyn had admitted in court documents that she didn't know how to cook, having relied on servants her entire married life. What many people didn't know at the time was that Alec had fled the country after the gun incident. He became a fugitive for nearly 2 years, hiding in various locations to avoid the American legal system. He finally returned in September 2000, pleaded guilty to the charges, and agreed to an order of protection that forbade him from contacting Jocelyn for a full year. The fact that a billionaire art dealer had spent 2 years on the run from domestic charges spoke to how seriously he took the situation, or perhaps how much he feared what might come out in a prolonged legal battle. After Daniel Wildenstein passed away in 2001, Alec inherited half of his father's fortune, estimated at $10 billion, including what was believed to be the world's largest private collection of major works of art. This inheritance ensured that the payments to Jocelyn could continue as ordered. But Alec's life after the divorce was quiet and troubled. He continued to manage the family's art business and breed race horses. But the scandal had taken its toll. He died in 2008 from prostate cancer, just 9 years after the divorce was finalized. He was 67 years old. For Jocelyn, the question now was what to do with all that money and all that freedom. She had won one of the biggest divorce settlements in history, but she had also lost her family, her home, and in many ways, her identity. What came next would prove that having billions of dollars doesn't guarantee happiness or even financial security, freedom, and the search for love. After the divorce was finalized, Jocelyn sold the Manhattan townhouse for $13 million and tried to move on with her life. She had more money than she could ever spend, or so it seemed. She told interviewers that she had found freedom, that instead of having to behave according to a program set by her husband and his family, she could suddenly do whatever she wanted. She embraced her notoriety, attending events, traveling, and living life on her own terms. But the estrangement from her children was painful. Diane and Alec Jr. had sided with their father during the divorce, and the rift never fully healed. Diane went on to live in London, breeding Race horses, an interest she had inherited from her father. Alec Jr. took over management of Old Yogi, which had been turned into a luxury resort and conservation area. When Jocelyn faced financial troubles later, she blamed her daughter Diane for not helping her, which only deepened the divide. By 2023, Jocelyn admitted she hadn't seen her grandchildren since the eldest was 3 years old. That kind of isolation for all her money and fame must have been devastating. In 2003 at New York Fashion Week, Jocelyn met Lloyd Klein, a French fashion designer who was 20 years her junior. Despite the age difference, they connected over their mutual love of extravagant style and fashion. Lloyd was drawn to Jocelyn's confidence and her refusal to apologize for who she was. They began dating, and the relationship would last for more than 2 decades. But it wasn't an easy relationship. The couple fought frequently, sometimes violently. In 2016, a domestic dispute at Jocelyn's Trump World Tower apartment led to both of them being arrested. They took out restraining orders against each other. Yet somehow they always reconciled. After one particularly bad fight, Lloyd gave Jocelyn 2 extravagant apology rings, including a 200-carat emerald and diamond creation. In 2017, he proposed to her at Miami's Versace mansion, where they had often socialized with their late friend, Gianni Versace. Later that same year, they were arrested again after another heated argument. Friends said that many of their fights were about money. Despite the massive divorce settlement, Jocelyn's finances were unraveling, and what would unfold over the next decade would shock everyone who thought she was set for life with her billions, the disappearing billions. By the early 2000s, something had gone terribly wrong with Jocelyn's financial situation. The billions she had received in the divorce were supposed to last forever. The annual payments of $100 million alone should have been more than enough to maintain any lifestyle. But the money was gone. In 2015, the Wildenstein family cut off her divorce payments, claiming the trust had been depleted. Jocelyn disputed this, saying the family had simply embargoed her funds. She was sued for $70,000 in credit card debt that same year, along with unpaid rental fees. By 2018, the situation had become desperate. Jocelyn filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection, claiming she had $0 in her bank account. She listed various tangible assets worth $39 million against liabilities of $38 million. Among her debts was $268,000 owed to Regal Jewelry and Gift Shop for unreturned gems, plus $75,928 in interest. When she failed to pay, the firm pursued legal action. In October 2023, Judge M.N.A. Sanchez-Lurin issued a writ of bodily attachment, essentially an order authorizing sheriffs in Florida to arrest Jocelyn, and detain her until she complied with court orders to return the jewelry or pay what she owed. Her 3 apartments in Trump Tower were repossessed in 2020. At the time of her bankruptcy filing, Jocelyn was in her late 70s, living in a Miami Beach apartment and facing eviction in a separate legal case. How had someone who had received billions of dollars ended Music Up broke? The explanations varied. Some suggested she had continued spending at her old pace, burning through money on clothes, jewelry, and maintaining her lifestyle. Others pointed to legal fees, bad investments, or simply the reality that even billions can disappear if you're spending millions every year and the payments stop. Jocelyn blamed the Wildenstein family and the trust structure of her divorce settlement. She told The Times in 2023 that problems with the trust had created her financial difficulties music, and that Alex's family had deliberately cut her off after his death in 2008. The Wildenstein themselves were music dealing with their own legal troubles. Guy Wildenstein, Alex's brother, was charged with tax fraud and money laundering to the tune of $600 million. He was eventually convicted in 2024 and sentenced to 4 years in prison with a $1 million fine. The family's finances were complicated, secretive, and apparently as troubled as Jocelyn's had become. Most people in Jocelyn's situation would have faded from public view, living quietly on whatever remained of their fortune. But Jocelyn was about to experience something unexpected, a second act that no one saw coming, a late-life renaissance. Despite her financial troubles, something unexpected happened in Jocelyn's final years. The woman who had been mocked and ridiculed for decades became, in a strange way, celebrated. Fashion magazines and style publications that had once sneered at her appearance began featuring her in glossy photo-oots. Paper Magazine and Interview Magazine did profiles on her, treating her not as a cautionary tale, but as a fascinating icon of persistence and style. Her otherworldly appearance, which tabloids had once snarked over, was now celebrated by outlets that appreciated camp and unconventional beauty. Jocelyn maintained her gaudy glamour despite being broke, continued to deny the extent of her surgeries, music, and remained unapologetic about everything. This, combined with her tumultuous relationship with Lloyd and her general refusal to fade away, quietly made her a campy icon of sorts. She was even imitated by attendees in the front row at Haute Couture Fashion Week in Paris. On Instagram, music, she amassed over 1 million followers who seemed genuinely fascinated by her life and her appearance. She posted photos of herself at events with Lloyd and occasionally threw in vintage pictures from before her transformation, images that reminded people that she had once been a natural beauty. The contrast was startling, but Jocelyn never acknowledged it. She embraced her identity as Catwoman, while simultaneously insisting she hadn't had that much work done. In interviews during her later years, she opened up more than she ever had before. She told reporters she had stayed silent during her children's teenage years because she didn't want the scandal to fall back on them. Now that they were adults and estranged from her anyway, she felt free to speak. She talked about the divorce, about Alec, about the life they had built and lost. There was a wistfulness to her reflections, a sense of someone looking back on what might have been. She and Lloyd talked about doing a reality show together, capitalizing on their fame and their dramatic relationship. They attended events, were photographed at fashion shows, music, and seemed determined to live life fully despite everything. Jocelyn never stopped caring about style and appearance. She continued to attend her boyfriend's runway presentations and posed for fashion photographers who saw something artistic in her unusual features. The final chapter. On New Year's Eve, December 31st, 2024, Jocelyn and Lloyd were in Paris staying at a hotel. They had plans to celebrate the holiday that evening, but first they decided to take a nap. Lloyd woke up around dusk and found that Jocelyn hadn't. She had passed away in her sleep from a pulmonary embolism. She was 84 years old. Lloyd announced her passing to the press, calling her an icon and expressing shock at her sudden departure. The news spread quickly through social media and entertainment outlets. Tributes poured in from fans, fellow socialites, and people in the fashion world who had come to admire her resilience. Whatever else could be said about Jocelyn Wildenstein, she had lived life on her own terms, or at least she had tried to. The story of Jocelyn Wildenstein is tragic music, in ways that go beyond the obvious. Yes, her appearance became the subject of worldwide mockery. Yes, she lost billions of dollars and ended up estranged from her children. But the deeper tragedy is about the impossible standards women face, the lengths they go to in order to keep love, and what happens when those efforts fail spectacularly. Jocelyn grew up as a natural beauty in Switzerland, traveled to Paris, learned to fly planes and hunt, and met a billionaire on an African safari. She should have had a fairy tale life, but she made one critical mistake. She believed that changing her appearance would change how someone felt about her. She thought she could recapture her husband's attention by transforming herself into something he might desire more. When that didn't work, she kept going, kept changing, perhaps hoping that eventually she would get it right. The psychology of it is heartbreaking. The idea that you're never quite enough and that just one more procedure, one more change will finally make you worthy of love. The media turned her into a punchline. But Jocelyn was a real person with feelings, dreams, and regrets. Music. She loved Africa and spent years managing the Kenyan ranch that meant everything to her. She raised 2 children. She experienced betrayal, heartbreak, and ultimately the kind of public humiliation that would break most people. The tabloid coverage was relentless for years, with photographers following her, comedians mocking her, and strangers on the street staring and whispering. The psychological toll of becoming a global joke while simultaneously going through a divorce and losing contact with your children is difficult to imagine. And yet, she survived, continued to show up at events, continued to dress in designer clothes, continued to refuse to apologize or explain herself beyond vague statements about Swiss heritage. There was a defiance in her refusal to hide, a determination to live her life visibly despite the mockery. Whether that was courage or simply an inability to accept reality is something each person will judge differently. Her story serves as a reminder about the costs of obsession and the impossibility of changing who you are to please someone else. It's about the cruelty of tabloid culture and the way society treats women who dare to age, to change, or to exist outside music, narrow beauty standards. Women are told they must stay young and beautiful forever. But when they take extreme measures to try to do so, they're ridiculed for those same efforts. Jocelyn was caught in that impossible bind, criticized for aging, then criticized for trying not to age. But it's also about resilience. Jocelyn kept going, kept living, kept finding love even when everything else had fallen apart. After losing a husband who betrayed her, after being mocked by millions, after going from billionaire to bankrupt, she still found someone who loved her. She still showed up at fashion shows. She still posed for magazine covers. She still refused to disappear quietly into obscurity. That takes a kind of strength that shouldn't be dismissed, even if the choices that led to her situation were questionable. In the end, she died in Paris, the city where her grand adventure had really begun all those decades ago, when she was just a pretty Swiss girl with dreams of Africa and adventure. She had lived an extraordinary life, made terrible mistakes, lost everything, and somehow still managed to become an icon. Whether that icon status is something to celebrate or mourn is left for each person to decide. If you enjoyed this video, please like and subscribe to our channel so you never miss out on more fascinating stories.